Hello.
We're all having some peanut M&Ms to get our energy up because all of us are a little quiet, especially our guest. Welcome to the Jan Broberg
Thank you
Show.
very much.
Mhm. So we're here today and with my co-host, Dave Markel. He has the podcast Sexual Assault Survivor Stories.
I do. And it's an honor to be here with you.
I'm crunching peanut M&Ms
You are.
and I have to swallow them. So I'm so sorry.
We took a break and started.
I took record. I hit record too soon, but here we are. No, it's fine because we're all friends. This is the beauty of once in a while being able to be in the same room together and not having to do the podcast remote. It really is a pleasure. And because Dave has been so considerate to let us come to his studio with the blue. I love the blue, Dave. This really typifies Dave, though. If you're watching this on YouTube, he has that pretty light blue because he's always happy, or at least I see him that way, and he's always so nice. And then there's me with the dark blue, very moody, very, I kind of have had a dark cloud following me around this week. I've felt a little overwhelmed.
I think everybody in St. George right now has a dark cloud following them around because it's been rainy and cloudy and drizzly and kind of everybody seems to be a little bit on the downside because of the weather.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great. We need it and we love the moisture.
Well, that's true. We do need the rain. We are in a very dry, terrible drought in this state.
Have been for years.
But I've never seen this much rain in St. George. St. George is like a desert.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm in Seattle. I was just in Seattle. I loved Seattle.
Been crazy.
Anyway, so I'm gonna change my dark blue moody mood to a much more positive blue like Dave has behind his head. And I'm going to introduce my dear friend, Alan Manwaring. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have Alan here. I met Alan in junior high school. He is the cousin of one of my best friends, Janet Hull. And what was it, about 8th grade?
Probably about it. Probably
It was after the first kidnapping.
Yeah, I think it was right after the first kidnapping somewhere in that general vicinity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Back in school.
Yeah, back in school.
I mean, the newspaper said Broberg girl found in Mexico unharmed.
I didn't even really know. I had no clue about all that kind of stuff at that time.
No.
Because I wasn't from Pocatello.
That's right.
So I didn't know that stuff.
That's right. Alan would come and visit his cousin, and we would all get together because we were all right there.
That's right. Yeah, my favorite cousin lived in Pocatello. I shouldn't say my favorite cousin. I have a lot of.
Yeah, she just lived up on 20th Street.
Big trouble. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
One of my favorite cousins.
Well, there you go.
Well, she is a favorite. I always have to say she's one of my very best friends as well. And
Exactly.
and those were good times. Thank goodness I had such good, friends and others that were there when I needed them a few years later to support me through the healing process, because those were some rough years, those junior high years. But then you came at one point. You were from Memphis.
Yeah, I grew up in Memphis, but my parents moved between my junior and senior year of high school. And so I didn't really know where to be for my senior year, and they gave me some choices. And so in thinking through some of those choices, I actually spent about 2 months in Pocatello.
And went to high
I
school.
went to high school with you guys. Right.
Why didn't you stay and go the whole time and graduate from Pocatello High School?
Well, I think that I think academically it made more sense to go back because of the way the credit systems work and things like that.
Mm,
And so, and it probably made more sense to go back and finish in Memphis anyway.
right.
So, and I'm really glad I did. I love Pocatello, believe me.
Yeah.
I
But
think
you did graduate from the high school that you had been going
I
to?
did. I did.
Who did you live with when your parents had moved?
I went back to live with good friends of the family.
Okay.
Who were just good friends in our ward, quite honestly, there.
Okay.
And they were fantastic people. They were the Hyatt family and the Peterson family.
Okay.
Just great people. And I was going to say is Pocatello was fantastic. I think I'm actually in this. I think my picture's in the yearbook.
Really?
Senior year there.
Oh, we'll have to dig out my.
I think I'm not sure.
Dig out my
100% sure, but I think it is.
books. We're gonna look for Alan.
So I didn't really graduate from Pocatello High School, but I went there for about 2
And
months.
got your picture taken.
I
in
think it
some
was during
activity.
that time when they took your pictures for your senior year.
Okay.
I think it's. I'm not sure. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. But I graduated from my high school in Memphis that I grew up with. Which
Okay.
I'm glad about that too.
Yeah. Well,
I loved Memphis.
It's wonderful. And honestly, to have known Alan all these years, you know how people circle back in your life?
Yeah.
Like I've known Dave for a long time too. I mean, it was after I moved here to
Yeah,
this
it's been
area,
20 years.
but it goes by.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't see somebody for a while, and then all of a sudden you see them again, and it's like a time warp.
Yeah.
You just,
Yeah.
if they're good friends.
You just pick up where
Exactly.
you left off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I remember, at BYU, I'd see you there. And then there've been periods of our life where we haven't seen each other for a long time. But about 10 years ago, I think, we just started seeing each other a lot again.
Yeah, it was because we have a love of theater. And
Yeah.
so sometimes you'd come and see a production that I was in,
Right.
or we would go to see some other production, and then we'd have a big, juicy conversation. And
Yeah.
Dave also
Yeah.
is a theater lover, and that's how I met him.
Right.
I met him because of the theater.
Yeah.
And I met Alan because of you.
Yes.
So I've known Alan now almost a year.
Yeah.
I think.
This has been so
Probably
fun.
9, 10 months.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Yeah. So how our lives intertwine and circle and our journeys go in different directions, and then they cross paths again. When I wanted to start all of these various methods of madness to try and get this message out about healing, about how serious the problem of childhood sex abuse actually is, that it's really, truly 25% of the world who have been through sex abuse as children, as young people, as teenagers. And what the aftermath is for those people is very similar to what combat veterans go through. And this was not necessarily a known thing back in, when we were graduating from high school. It still wasn't really being talked about. But now, fast forward 40 years later, there's so many ways that I believe we can make an impact. So I started this podcast. So here we are, as one way to tell survivor stories and one way to get experts to help us know what are those actual scientifically proven, clinically proven methods to heal, the central nervous system, the brain, how much healing is really possible. What are you going to keep carrying through your life that you just have to learn how to cope with? Because all those things are true, right, Dave? Dave is the expert on that. Give us a little reality check on the process of healing.
Well, it's something that takes time, for one thing. And when you talk about trauma, you're talking about some pretty deeply embedded neuropaths. And those neuropaths want to just keep replaying that trauma. And if something reminds us of the trauma, if there's what I call activators, some people call them triggers, but I'm kind of trying to get away from that word because it's in itself kind of
Scary.
activating.
Yeah, it's a scary word, a trigger.
Word.
Ooh.
When that happens, as Bessel van der Kolk says in his book, the Body Keeps the Score, it isn't just a cognizant realization, but the amygdala, the deep part of our limbic system in our brains, can be reactivated. And then we kind of go into those same kind of feelings, emotions, physical reactions. To get past that takes some pretty intense therapy. And there's so many different kinds now. The EMDR, the rapid eye movement
I
therapy.
really like that one.
Ketamine is being experimented with. And what we're trying to do with that when psychologists and psychiatrists and mental health workers work with those different techniques, what you're trying to do is reroute those neural paths and avoid the scary feelings and look at them as just factual situations that happened in our history
Right.
and get past that. But it does take some intense work on the part of the people who are traumatized.
Exactly. It was interesting, that same book. I've been listening to it recently and making notes because I was getting ready to go speak at an engagement with about 400 women in a medical center, a lot of nurses, a lot of hospital workers, and then other members of the community, and they wanted to talk about grooming. They wanted to talk about ending the cycle of abuse, and they wanted to talk about how do you heal? Is there really hope for that? And how can we change the world? Because it still is just an enormous problem.
Yeah.
It is. And you, Dave, taught me that this culture that we live in is a rape culture.
Yeah.
It favors the perpetrators, not the victims. It's like when a woman or a man is interviewed, immediately it's as if they are guilty until proven innocent, which is the opposite.
Yes, as though they did something wrong.
Right. And they're
Mhm.
trying to report a crime and they are traumatized all over again, activated all over again. And it does not favor those that have been through the trauma. So I've been listening to that book and it made another very interesting what I kind of wanted to start here with that very same book, Body Keeps the Score. This Bessel van der Kolk was going through kind of the first beginnings of psychotherapy, becoming a psychotherapist.
Mhm.
And he worked with combat veterans first and was like, oh, they're suffering from all of these things, rage, depression, anxiety, can't keep a job, don't even have the confidence, or, they're in catatonic states at times. Their memory is gone. They're, all these various things, alcohol, addiction, the things that come when you are in a state of trauma, to self-medicate, cutting, anorexia, bulimia, all these things that we know happen are the same things that he worked with the combat veterans, with women in this mental hospital. That was like his second job. And in 1982, the leading textbook that he was reading out of psychotherapy textbook, said that about they decided that 1 in 1,000,000 women had experienced incest. That was what the textbook said
That's
in
amazing.
1982. And he's like, I'm working in this mental hospital, and out of my patients that I have there who are being given electroshock therapy because they have all these same things that the
Symptoms.
combat veterans had, all the same things. And so we're going to put them in electric shock therapy because, they're crazy. Whatever that time period, however they looked
Right.
at that, was the beginning of mental health, but they had s- not enough answers. This was one of the answers. And they thought, he said, so I started talking to those women before they went in for electric shock therapy and asking them just a handful of questions. And he said the one thing that every single one of them shared across the board was that they were all sexually abused, raped, molested, or had incest as young people, children, tweens, teenagers. And he said, it made me go, wait, how is it possible that out of 100 million women that were living in the United States in 1982, there were only supposed to be 100? And he said, and I had 47 of them in my office before I was taking them in to do electroshock therapy. And he finally quit that job because he couldn't stand the electroshock therapy. He totally disagreed with it. I just thought that was such an amazing, like, that was 1982. PTSD did not become a thing until what, 1989? When they started to recognize it as a
Recognizing
thing?
it and labeling it that, yeah. And the really shocking thing too, Jan, is that even the statistic now, as far as the prevalence rate being estimated at 1 in 4, I think is probably low,
That
sadly.
be low. It
I know.
makes me just sick.
But we don't have any exact numbers because
Not everybody reports.
it's really hard to get people to talk about. It's shaming, it's embarrassing, it's damaging. And in our society, as you mentioned, we live in a rape society. People who report are troublemakers.
Yeah.
They're the ones making waves
Yes.
and often blamed for their own crime
Yeah, what
and
happened to them.
for their experience, when exactly the opposite should happen. They should be believed and they should be helped and they should be
Right.
taken at their word.
Yes.
And if we had more accurate numbers, I think sadly that those
Numbers
rate
would be even
higher.
bigger. So even 25% seems so outrageous. And then they
Right.
grow up, and that's still
Yeah.
a new 25% plus the people that are already affected, and nobody's getting healing because we aren't doing all of the things that we could be doing, which is why I asked Alan to become the executive director of the Jan Broberg Foundation. And he has an amazing background, and the foundation is going to be set up to do some of the things that can actually make an awareness happen, prevention happen, and can help with true healing modalities for those that have been harmed as adults.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And it's amazing, Jan, that you have taken this on as part of your foundation to get the word out, but also to offer assistance, not only through the online community, but this foundation in raising money and doing what we can do to offer assistance to victims and survivors. Alan, tell us a little bit, if you would, about your history, your experience in getting nonprofits up and going.
Well, I guess, yeah, like I said, I've known Jan forever. And we've gone through our lives. We've seen each other more often than other times. The last 10 years or so, we've seen each other a lot. She's become my therapist.
And you mine.
Anyway.
Because all of us are survivors.
Yes, exactly.
All of us are survivors of sexual abuse as young people. You know, children, tweens, most of it. All three of us were we were tweens, and we all suffered some pretty severe trauma in the sexual abuse arenas by close people to us, by people that we knew.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so first and foremost, we have experience. Okay, keep going, Alan.
Exactly. No, so anyway, my sort of history of this is that I went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, and while I was there, I sort of bumped into a situation where I started working for a congresswoman down in Washington at the same time I was finishing my graduate studies at Penn, and ended up working for her down in Washington for a while. And then she finished her term, and we started working on some projects that were aimed at trying to promote women-owned businesses and get more capital to women-owned businesses. And this is the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And anyway, what happened is that we had some ideas on how to promote these ideas, and we had these ideas on how to get a summit together, a research summit that was designed to basically help promote more access to capital for women-owned businesses. And the concept that we had was a concept of bringing together the private sector, the corporations of the world, the business people of the world, the public policy sector, politicians and public policy drivers, and the academicians who do a lot of the research and that drives public policy, and business drives a lot of public policy, and so on and so forth. So we brought those three different components of society together for a certain goal. And in that particular case, it was, women-owned businesses to promote them.
So women-owned businesses, getting more capital in their hands so they could own and run.
Yeah, get
their
more
own
capital
business.
in their hands, because at the time, one of the things we'd also done is I'd worked for a woman by the name of Marjorie Margolis, a congresswoman from Pennsylvania, from the Philadelphia area, and who's a wonderful, fantastic woman. And one of the things that she had done with some other people in Congress as well was to sponsor a 5% procurement goal for women-owned businesses. Not a mandate, but a goal. And the reason behind that was because if you gave a goal, then it would have the government and the government and GSA groups and things like that actually expend money start having to think of how they were going to achieve that goal of 5%. At the time, it was like 1.9% or something like that. And so by simply mandating a goal, not a mandate, but a goal, they have to start thinking about doing that. And so because she had done that when she was in Congress, the National Women's Business Council had asked her to go ahead and head up some things afterward, which ended up being part of this summit that we were working on.
Okay.
That started me down a sort of a series of developing nonprofits that had a goal in mind, an achievement kind of goal in mind. In this case, it was, giving more capital to women-owned businesses. And so one thing would lead to another. And so I've had a sort of a history of developing nonprofits that, that have objectives, and then I bring those three different sectors of society together to try and achieve those objectives. And it takes time.
Right.
And these things take time. My father, at the same time, was doing a lot of stuff in the national security arena. And so he and some of his friends had come to me after I was doing some of these things and said, Alan, we want you to take some of these concepts that you've sort of used to apply to achieving certain things and use them in our areas to achieve certain goals as well. So we continue down that long line of bringing together the public policy sector, the business sector, and the academicians to achieve a certain end in achieving national security strategy objectives. So that's sort of my history in terms of all these things.
So working through those, not only there's strategies, but there has to be, policies that have to be enacted, so to
Absolutely.
speak. There has to be if you're going to have a national awareness campaign for adults about sexual assault and abuse, somebody's got to pay for that. Somehow you got to have the policy happens, and then the funding has to happen, and then the right things have to be said in 30 seconds so people
Exactly.
see
If you're
grooming or
gonna have-
whatever.
Right. If you're going to have children, for example, educated in schools on how to be aware of things to make sure they're not being easily victimized.
Right, because if it's in their home and they're 7, they may not have any other reference point. They know it hurts, they know they don't like it, but they don't have the words, they don't have the
Exactly.
knowledge. You have to
Right.
give them education.
Education, or even to prevent. I mean, for example, I was having a conversation yesterday, the day before, with somebody who was saying, one of the things they need to do is they need to have somebody out there educating parents on things like, don't have your kid's name on his backpack,
Right.
so that somebody can't come up to him and say, oh, Will, your dad told me to come and pick you up from school because he can't get here right now. And little things like that. Don't have a code word for, if that kind of things happens where you can't be there. You have to have a code word to give your kid to say that if the person coming to you and says, I'm here to pick you up because, your parents can't be here, there needs to be a code word. Little things like that. If you want to educate kids or parents on how to do those kinds of things, if you want to educate children on how to be aware of things, you have to have programs that basically the government mandates or puts in place to be used to educate these kids. That's done through legislation and through public policy initiatives.
Right. And I think that when you're talking about familiar or familial abusers, they generally are grooming
Oh, yes.
from day one,
Right.
whoever it is, and the parents around the child. If it's not the parent or a close family member, then, they're making friends, they're building trust. And sometimes when you get picked up from your piano lesson by someone that you've known for 3 years and done hundreds of activities with, you certainly don't have a code word because he doesn't look like
Oh,
a
no,
scary stranger.
exactly. No,
And
yeah.
so those are
Right.
the
Oh,
kinds
yeah.
of campaigns. That's the kind of
Sure.
knowledge that
There's
I
a whole
want to
bunch.
see
Absolutely.
happen.
Well, that was one example.
Yeah,
There's
no,
a
it's a
whole
good example
plethora
because
of
everybody can
examples.
relate to that.
Absolutely.
But
There's
those are the things that are missing.
Yeah, that, and there's also tons of laws, as Dave was referring to a little while ago. Right now, you're sort of guilty until proven innocent. If you report a crime, they don't believe you
Yeah,
until
especially a sexual crime.
crime. They're not
Right.
going to believe you. You have to prove until and which is the exact opposite of the way it should be. And in conversations in the past with people, it seems like right now, the law and the way the laws are written give the benefit of the doubt to the perpetrator as opposed to the victims and the survivors of these crimes. And we need to try and do things to change the laws so that it has the preponderance of benefit to the survivors as opposed to the perpetrators. It's
Yeah.
things like that through legislation that you can do, through public policy issues that you can do to help change those kinds of things. That's just one concept.
And that's really good because that's why people don't report. Why Dave was saying, well, the numbers are 1 in 4, but what about all those that haven't reported, don't report
Oh,
because
yeah.
they feel like there's no chance that
Oh, yeah.
what I say will be believed.
Right.
That's why I started the online community, because even if you can't report and put your person in jail now because you're in your 50s and it happened when you were 13
Sure.
and maybe they're even dead or who knows,
Yeah.
but you need a place to still be safe, be believed, to tell your story. It is
Yeah.
the first step in healing. There is literally research that has been done that certain things, neural pathways, the way that a secret is lethal, like this kind of
Right.
secret, does not, ignoring it will not allow you the healing that you could experience by telling your story, even if that isn't publicly like I did, even if that isn't, to a detective who, like Dave, when he was a detective, believed those women
Yeah.
in Colorado where he started and started to see this pattern. Like, we're not interviewing people correctly. We're traumatizing them. They're clamming up. They're not telling us because they don't remember it in some kind of sequential order. I mean, these are things that you've said that I just think are so important for people to understand and to be taught.
Right.
It is true. And I think probably the core of the problem goes back to something we've discussed in the past, and that is the fact that we live in a rape society where the societal norm is to blame the victim, is to say that you're the troublemaker and not believe that person because the the consensus among most lay people is that people report this kind of crime in order to get someone else in trouble, in order to cause
Yeah, like they made it up.
Right.
as some sort of retaliation or something along those lines. And the history behind what causes cultures and societies to be a rape culture is long and complicated.
Yeah.
But what we have to do is just acknowledge that that's the case and start somewhere.
Right.
And that's what this whole Jan Broberg Foundation is about, is the educational process that, yes, this is the situation we are confronted with. We need to start believing victims from the get-go and addressing those situations like grooming, like education for potential victims, but also education for the parents of those potential
Yeah,
victims.
for the adults. I feel like the adults need more education than the kids because the child, you can never put the burden of preventing abuse on the child. They only have so much mental capacity. Their brains aren't fully developed. The
No,
part of the
right.
brain that is your conscience kind of thing, at least I've been told this before, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't fully develop until you're like 25 to 29 years old.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so that's why a teenager walks out in moving traffic on a, busy road and doesn't really think that the cars can possibly hit them
And they do.
because their brain isn't really developed with
Yeah.
that whole like consequential
Mhm.
sort of thinking. And so you can't really put the burden on them. You should teach them. You should do what you can to teach them the right body parts and to tell them, this is yours. You're in charge of this. Anyone that hurts you, you can teach them certain things, but almost every child, if they tried to tell mommy or daddy, or if it was mommy or daddy,
Yeah.
who do they tell? That's the
Yeah.
differentiation that Vanderkolk makes. He said the combat veteran knows who the enemy is.
Mhm.
The child, the tween, has no idea who the enemy is because it's the caretaker, the nurturer, the person that feeds them,
Exactly.
gives them shelter, is supposed to love them, is the abuser. It's someone close to them. It is so confusing. So who do they tell? And then if they try to tell, if that mom just says, "Oh, honey, I think did you see a story? Did you now,
Make
come
it
on,
decide.
Uncle so and so.
Yeah.
He's so much fun. That tickling fight, I think he's just
kidding.
trying to play.
He's
It's
just
just a
kidding.
game."
It's just a game.
Oh, I've heard this so many times in the people I've interviewed on my podcast.
Well, and those of us,
Ugh,
in the
so
adult
sad.
realm, there are so many people who don't understand these dynamics
Right.
of how child perpetrators think and act and groom and manipulate the situation, that they rely on that mentality of, oh, it's just a game, and they exploit that to the point where they just keep reoffending and reoffending and reoffending, and it can go on for years,
Yeah.
from childhood clear into adulthood.
Sure.
That happens all the time.
I think my guy was offending until almost the day that he killed himself because I know, his stepdaughters ran away. I know that, he was like had access to second graders because his wife was a school teacher at the time. This is a different person than his original wife. I don't know. I just feel like this is something that really the public does not fully understand or they don't want to. Who
Right.
wants to talk about child rape? No
No
one.
one.
And
You
that's the
know?
other aspect of all of this is that the human psyche doesn't like to hear about horrible, atrocious,
They don't.
painful thought processes. So we shut that down. And all that does is add to that rape society. Until we acknowledge that it's there and admit it and confront it in our own psyches and say, I'm ready to do something about this and bring justice to those victims and survivors, nothing's going to change, which is why it's so exciting that you have a foundation and that Alan,
these
that
are our
you're working
goals.
and that you
And I
know
was
what
gonna
to do.
say, yeah, well, I was gonna say the other thing that's really come to my mind in this conversation is that along with, of course, not being believed, one of the other things that prevents people from talking about these things, especially as kids, is the shame.
Right.
It's just this incredible shame and this incredible um, belief that it certainly doesn't happen to anybody else.
Oh,
And
right.
so,
Yeah. Like this is
like, it's only like people would think I'm crazy if I told them what had happened and things like that. So, one of the other really important parts of the foundation, besides working on legislative initiatives to help change laws and things like that, in terms of the educational component here, is to provide a place for people to tell their stories.
Mhm.
And so when people can tell their stories, they can see that, oh my gosh, this didn't just happen to me.
Right. You're not
I mean,
alone.
you're not alone. I mean, for me personally, with my own process, um, the probably the most important component of beginning a healing process for me was to finally understand that there were other people this happened to as well. That I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone in having these experiences.
And having the outcomes of those experiences.
Sure, in having
You know,
outcomes
the
of experiences.
loneliness, the
Sure,
rage,
yeah,
the whatever,
yeah.
whatever yours.
All those things that can happen as a result of all these things.
Right.
And and so one of the other things about the foundation is through promoting the education, the awareness of these issues, through providing, a forum for these things to be talked about.
Mhm.
You're providing people the opportunity to understand that these things don't just happen to me.
Right.
It happen. Oh my gosh, it actually happens to other people. And
And when the business community, along with the academic community, along with the political community, actually can all see it and come together,
Mhm.
you know, and figure out what are the best practices or laws to make or education campaigns to launch or what things actually will make a difference, it can make an impact.
Yeah.
Dave showed me one organization that in their they said right in the opening paragraph, another nonprofit that said 95% of sexual abuse of children can be prevented. And I was like, is that really true, Dave? How is that possible?
And it's all based on education.
It's all based on education.
Sure.
So, Alan, tell us then some of the vision that you have moving forward for the Jan Broberg Foundation. What are some of the thoughts and plans that you have come up with and with Jan and some of our other consultants
Sure.
and people that are
Yeah.
contributing into this thought
Yeah.
process? What's going on?
Well, the first thing I think to start with on that is to outline that when we all sat down and started talking about a foundation, and we've talked about this for the last 20 minutes or so already, about what the objectives of the foundation are going to be, we sort of came, into to sort of three things we wanted to really try and push. One was education and awareness, to bring education and awareness to this issue, to provide, you know, a forum for people to become more aware of what's going on in these things. That was one. Another one was provide a place for people to actually tell their stories so they could actually be heard and believed and understand that they're not alone in these things. And the third thing that we really sort of focused on was a concept of legislative initiatives trying to bring about change. And so those are sort of the three things we sort of thought we need to focus on those kinds of things, along other things too. There's a lot of subcomponents of things we're working on that fall under those areas.
Of
But
course.
those are the sort of the three thrusts. And so we thought, okay, well, if we want to have a foundation, what can we do to help in that healing process?
Right.
And I guess that was the thing that really, um, you know, was really wanting to drive Jan to begin with, to begin this whole thing. And I got to say one thing about Jan really quick. I want to tell on Jan for a second.
Uh-oh.
You're in trouble. I want the audience to know that, that when Jan um, went through the process of being a producer for the series, A Friend of the Family, exactly, on Peacock, instead of taking her proceeds, or whatever you want to call it, from doing that, and, paying off a mortgage or buying a yacht or something like that.
Oh, I didn't get enough to buy a yacht.
Yeah, no, exactly. Not to buy a yacht.
Maybe buying a new car for the first time in my life. I've never owned a new car.
Right.
I drive a 2007 Honda.
Exactly.
Hybrid.
No, exactly. But that's
Still.
my point. Instead of taking those proceeds and doing something for herself, she took those proceeds and created a foundation designed to heal others and to help other people. And that is probably one of the most magnanimous things that anyone could ever do.
Oh, thanks, Alan.
And that's true.
It is.
And I think the people should know that.
I'm
And
glad you
yeah,
brought it up. I'm glad you said it.
I mean, because it's
That is
true.
so true.
It is true. And so, anyway, so the main objective, I think, that Jan had in her mind to begin with was to help people heal.
Yeah, because I don't want it to be passed
I
on.
want to be passed on.
You
Exactly. To
know?
help people heal and to prevent.
Yes.
Yes. I mean,
Of course.
to help people heal who've been through the process and help
Who've been
prevent
harmed.
who've been harmed and to prevent it from happening to others in the future.
And the next generation.
Yes, exactly. So those are the two real things that all these other things come out of.
Right.
And so as far as back to your sort of initial question, Dave, what are the things we want to try and do to accomplish that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we could sit out here and we could say, okay, we want to, just, have podcasts or have other things that will and say, send us money into the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's not very effective, I don't believe, personally. I think that what you need to do is you need to have events that bring awareness to the issues and at the same time have those events then be things that people can donate money through by participation in order to then bring awareness. So, for example, one of the things that we're going to try and work toward and that we are working toward is to have some kind of a golf tournament combined with a music concert kind of event,
Right.
hopefully in the fall of this coming year. That would provide a vehicle for people to contribute to the foundation and to do that and get something out of it. And great golf tournaments,
Have a good time.
great time, and things of that nature.
Go on a hike up at
Go on a
the
hike,
Canyon.
things of that nature, so on and so forth. And then we take that money, for example, and not just, provide a foundation that continues to perpetrate itself, but also use that money to provide opportunities for people to heal. There's a whole bunch of ways that we can do that. We can, as a foundation, look to connect them to existing organizations that exist to help them go to retreats, help them go to therapies of some sort that they might need, help them in their legal issues if that's something that they might need. A whole array of things that we could help people with as far as that's concerned. Another thing that is a component, a separate entity from the foundation, but is a component of what Jan is working toward is to create an online community that provides a forum for people to share their stories, to talk about that. The foundation can help provide money for people to be able to participate in that.
Right.
So again, all the focal things that the foundation is doing is trying to raise money to help people heal through a whole array of different things. So that's one. One thing is the golf tournament, along with a music event we want to try and work toward in the fall of this year. Another thing we want to try and do that we're going to be very focused on is to create a research summit. Quite honestly, modeled after that research summit that I did for the Women's Economic Summit at the Kellogg School of Business back at Northwestern University many years ago, and bring again the academicians, the public policy community, and the business community together to talk about what research is out there right now that deals with these issues. How can that research that exists now help propel legislation that does the things like have the benefit go to the survivors as opposed to the benefit to the perpetrators? How can we create other research that doesn't exist right now that can help with these things in terms of education? What kind of research do we need to do to make public policy people feel comfortable to legislate towards more education in our public schools and or education towards parents to educate them? So there's a whole array of things that having a research conference can begin in terms of propelling things to move and change over time. And so that's another example is, a research conference. So we want to find a really good university to do that. And we already have been in conversations with some folks about these things. And there's great universities that will probably want to host this kind of an event, bring together a lot of the people that are doing the research, a lot of the people that have public policy initiatives that need more research behind them and propel things that way. So those are two examples of things that we're trying to do specifically to provide what Jan's original idea here was to provide people the opportunity to heal and to prevent. And those are the two things. One other thing I want to say about this is it takes time. And I'll use this as an example. Um, in 1990, I can't remember 1992 or 1993, 94, there was this legislation that I mentioned before. It was a 5% procurement goal for women-owned businesses, which meant that it was a goal that was given to the GSA, the Government Service Organization or Administration is one that buys all these things
Right.
for everything the government buys. And so there's a goal put on them in 1994, I think it was, that said you need to reach a 5% goal for women-owned businesses. And like I mentioned before, I think they were 1.9 or something like that when they did that. There was an article in the New York Times 4 years ago, might have been 5 years ago now, that said they finally achieved it.
Mm.
It took 20 years, basically, 20 plus years for that to happen. But it was something that when you propel through legislation, things to change and start making organizations in the government or in society in general start thinking about how to do something, it changes things over time.
Right.
And so that's the idea here is to have our foundation begin to help heal and prevent, and through a whole array of things.
But those are the greatest, they sound, it feels to me like often in, the business community, I'll just use this as an example. The things you can see are the things that they, put their money behind. And great, perfect. You look at McDonald's and the Ronald McDonald House, you can see children who need those services. You can see them. St. Jude's, sort of the same thing. Shriners Hospital. So you have certain things. I think what's so tricky about abuse and sexual abuse is there's no black eyes. You don't see it. I often say that the scream of an abused child is silence. And when that mommy says they're just playing a game, that child who is confused why the game hurts, but doesn't ever bring it up again because she didn't believe them, or the person that freaks out.
Right.
Children don't like somebody who's crying all of a sudden or who's angry all of a sudden because they told them something, then they feel like they did something wrong even. So when you can be taught how to be made aware of the real problem and to see what you can't actually see and to believe that it actually is a huge problem, and then to educate the adults how to respond, or the detectives or the police departments, because that's what Dave spent his early career, coming up to that point where he now teaches trauma-informed interview principles to, you taught it to all branches of the military. He's gone into the private sector as well as like police departments, because these same kind of principles that you teach them need to be taught to the parents.
Right.
So that they can listen correctly with empathy. I mean, just things that you would think every parent or adult or school teacher or somebody where a child might say something, they don't even know what to do next or how to deal with that.
Right.
Well, and I think, Alan, what really intrigues me most and why I wanted to be a part of this and to assist you and Jan
I wanted you to be a part of this
is that educational component that Jan just alluded to and that you spoke of. It's not just having fun and playing golf and going to a concert and listening and giving money to an organization because Jan is a known celebrity or person.
Sure.
It's a matter of getting people educated.
Yes.
And so, sign up for the golf tournament, but be prepared. We're going to teach you about what it means.
Absolutely.
And same with that research forum. It's, we're going to bring together hopefully, a lot of people who have done the research, who have written books, who have, put some information out there about what it means to understand that the body keeps the score and understand what trauma informed means and understand the neuroscience of trauma. But to not only acknowledge that and look at that, but see where else it can go.
Absolutely. That brings up a great point because I think that exactly. I mean, if you leave the golf tournament, and then the music events, you'll be more informed on these issues and you'll leave those events more informed and talk to other people to be more informed. You'll talk to your congressmen, you'll talk to your state legislatures, you'll talk to people. This is the point of those kinds of things. The educational component is so important. And that brings another thought to my mind about some of the other purposes of our foundation that I think are important to talk about. We don't pretend to have all the answers. We don't pretend, and I know, and Jan's been very clear about this in the very beginning. We know that there are a lot of great organizations out there that do a lot of great work in this area. And one of the things that we want to try and do is with our small and hopefully always enlarging group of people that we can talk to and influence, we want to be able to promote their best practices. I went to a male survivors weekend of recovery. I've been to 2 of those myself that are sponsored by, as put on by the Male Survivors Group, which is a fantastic organization, a national organization. Jan, you've gone to several of these.
And I went to a retreat that was done through, well, the Unique Makeup Company formed a foundation, and it's called Sapria.
Right.
And it was fantastic. It was just, 4 days.
Yeah.
But the things that we did that really did move the needle for, and all of us that were there.
Right.
There were only like 12 of us in this beautiful location in the woods with wonderful food, and just walking into a place where you already knew that I didn't know any of the other 11 ladies that were there, but I knew that they had been through child sexual abuse because that's the qualification to go. You don't have to pay. You have to get there.
Right.
But you didn't have to pay. And the way that it was organized and laid out, and the various, educational components that we had together, like classes, and then the art stuff that we did, that it all had a point, and it all was based, again, on that kind of clinical research and the science of healing, the neuroscience that we have now literally been privileged for that to come around since 50 years ago, when my abuse began, when the grooming began for me 50 years ago.
Right.
A couple of years later, I would be kidnapped and abused and brainwashed. And now, 50 years later, I know that there is so much more that actually is not just, oh, let's try to sing Kumbaya and heal.
Right.
But like what you did and what I did in those retreats, that men's group and Sapria, it was fantastic how it opened my eyes and my mind to what else I can do, even though I've been on this journey of healing for a long time.
Right.
And I started to identify certain things that happened in my progression through my life without meaning to or knowing, but I was like, that was a real breakthrough. Something transformational happened in my body, in my brain, in my emotional body, in my physical body that changed in me. And through doing that, I've basically identified like 12 things that were transformational breakthroughs for me in the healing process. And so that's a part of the online community as well. We're going to actually go through those things, almost like the 12-step program in AA, where, here's the 12 steps. You get stuck on one or you can't finish it. Well, maybe you go above to do this one a little more, or you got to work on that one for a year. Exactly. It may take, a long time. It may take a very short time, because there was something definitely that shifted in me. The year I kept a gratitude journal, for example, and now I can go back and through getting on my computer, I can research, is there a scientific reason why my life changed? That was one transformational point in my life, when I kept it for gratitude, like for being, living in a state of more gratitude. And sure enough, there's been research done. There's all kinds of studies. They can go, this is what happens to your brain when it is in a state of gratitude, or when it goes into a state of mindfulness, or it's so interesting. So that is like what I want people to have access to. So the online community is for healing. Sharing your story is number one. That is the first transformational breakthrough. And if you're not ready to do that on day one, come to the writing workshop that we have on the community. Go listen to an event where Dave Markel talks about memory.
Yeah.
Go listen to a therapist who is talking about why healing can't happen in a vacuum, that you actually need community. You need other people. You can do about half of the things on the list, but not the other half without another person,
Exactly.
at least.
That's right.
And so come to a safe place where you're believed, not judged, and never blamed. And maybe you can start that process, because there is actual science behind not keeping a secret and telling your story to someone who believes you, who listens with empathy, doesn't try to fix you, just listens.
Right. Absolutely. That is absolutely true.
So it's really, that's the reason I started Thrivivors, our online community, which is one of the branches,
Yeah,
that you've been talking about.
exactly.
And it's another reason I think why Dave and I both have, our own podcast. Dave does survivor sexual assault survivor stories.
Mhm.
Yeah, S.A.S. And interviewing not just children. Most of my survivor stories, it's based in childhood trauma.
Right.
Some kind of childhood
Right.
trauma. But Dave does all ages, rape victims. I mean, really interesting stories. And he knows a lot of experts because of the field of work he's been in. So he gets those on his show. And I'm getting a few of those more and more. But I'm loving that kind of combination between survivor and their story and expert and what they can bring to the healing process.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if people are healing, then they're going to be the hyper aware people, so that, first of all, they're not passing it on to their own children. Like for me, it took me a very long time to get to this place. I went through 4 marriages. My son experienced a lot of trauma because of my trauma.
Right.
And that's one of the things, that's one of the outcomes of
Absolutely.
childhood, this kind of trauma, sexual abuse and molestation and rape as a child
Yeah.
creates, I can't do relationships. I don't know what to do. I act like a 12-year-old instead of a 22-year-old or a 42-year-old, whatever.
Sure. Yeah, no, that reminds me of that book that I love so much by James Rhodes, Instrumental, which we've talked about a zillion times.
Yeah.
We won't go into the quote on this podcast today, but there's that quote where he says, if you don't think that these things don't cause this, and this, you're wrong, because they do. And that's that list of things, that are
Oh.
the same kind of things that are caused by with combat veterans and things of that nature.
Right.
These things cause those things in people.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely true and needs to be addressed. The other
Yeah.
thing that I think is so cool about what you're talking about right now and this whole conversation is that one of the things that I think the foundation wants to do, and Jan was so cool about this at the very beginning of creating this foundation. She wanted to make sure that she says to the world, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I just want to take my time of a bully pulpit, we're going to call it, and promote these things.
Right.
Knowing that we want to promote the things that we've just talked about, the experiences we've just had. There's a lot of great organizations out here that we want to highlight, that we want to make sure that people get directed to those things. We want to use our resources in due time to help direct people to those organizations as well, and have them participate in these kinds of things we're talking about.
Absolutely.
And again,
And then have the community, have the podcast where they are
absolutely,
safe to tell their stories
Exactly.
and safe to,
yeah,
have others that are in the same boat. It's just
Absolutely.
that wonderful feeling of not being alone, like you started with.
and so the more of this that happens, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The more
absolutely.
venues and vehicles that there are to share your stories, the
Yes.
more places there are to be educated on these things, the more of these things that exist, the better it is for the entire community.
Right. And that's where the business part comes in, because I often notice that things that you can see are supported. It's the things you can't see and quantify that oftentimes are a little bit overlooked. It seems like maybe it's not harder to get funding. Maybe as soon as we have all of these things in place and the summit and the research and the science, and we can show, here's half a dozen, here's 12,
Yeah.
men and women who survived this, and these are the things that they
Yeah.
have gone through, and this one needs a therapist, and this one
Yeah.
needs EMDR, and this
Yeah.
one needs a healing
Yeah.
program, a retreat, and this one needs, and there are some organizations that we want to highlight that have those,
Yes.
some of those things, and
Yeah.
we will have those
Exactly.
things.
Right.
It's like, then maybe they'll see.
Oh, they
It
will.
just feels
They
like,
will.
will they,
They will.
Alan?
They will.
Okay.
They will.
Because I just
Absolutely.
feel like, people
Absolutely.
can see like
Yeah.
trafficking
Yeah.
of children. They can get all, as soon as I start talking about it, it always goes to trafficking. And I'm like, what if we had everybody realizing that the first place most children are trafficked is in their home,
In their own family.
in their
That's
own
correct.
family?
Well, yeah.
What
I
if we
mean,
could change
exactly.
the way people think of that?
Yeah.
Because they
Exactly.
always go to that. They tell me
Yeah.
about, let's go to this organization in Costa Rica and
That's right.
help them, which is fantastic because somebody's doing that. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Of course we need to end that.
Right.
But here at home, the number of children that are going through trafficking, it's a different way to say it, but rape, incest, molestation by someone they know, it's just off the charts,
That
huge in numbers.
that brings me to two things that just came to my mind. First of all, from a very personal perspective, the movie Spotlight.
Oh, so good.
I lived that era. I lived in that era, and that is my experience. In terms of, and that's so real. There's so many kids out there who you would never know,
Right.
because there's 50 plus years old right now, who grew up in the 70s and experienced the things they talk about and show in Spotlight.
Yep.
The moving around of different situations and things of that
Yeah.
nature.
Priests moving around and then
Exactly.
moving into a school.
School,
which
things
is what
like that.
happened to you.
Was happening to me. And those are real. I mean, there's so many people out there who've experienced those things. And I don't take anything away from trafficking issues
No.
at
Not
all.
at all.
And of course, but I promise you, there's a lot more who've experienced that, that Spotlight example than have experienced trafficking.
Yes.
And the other thing that reminds me of is a song that I love so much by Michael McLean, I think, called Safe Harbors. And whenever he introduces that song, he says, my wife was talking to me one night about all the refugees that there are in this world and how, and he felt like he needed to do something to help them.
Yeah.
And she turned around to him and said, Michael, if you think about it, there are refugees in this neighborhood you could help. There's refugees among us. And that song, it sort of derives from that concept. There's refugees among us.
Mm-hmm.
They're not from foreign wars or foreign shores. They're in your. I don't know the exact words, but basically it says they're standing next to you in the market checkout line.
Yeah.
And that's true. I mean, there are people who experience the kinds of things that we're trying to help with, who everyone knows, as you always remind people. Everyone knows.
Yeah.
And they just don't know that
just don't
that
know that they
person's
don't-
been
exactly.
through, and they're like,
Yeah. I encourage people to look up Michael McLean's Safe Harbors to check out those lyrics.
I know Michael McLean.
I know. I think you might. Exactly.
Friend. He's awesome.
And that song is one of my favorite songs.
And I think I've said this on my own podcast. I think you and I discussed it when I interviewed you and you interviewed me for our mutual podcasts. And that is what we're doing here and what we've said over and over again with the online community and everything. Things don't change if you don't talk about them.
No.
Right.
And we have to talk. And that's why we're here. And that's why these podcasts exist. And that's why the online community exists. That's why we're going to do a golf tournament. That's why we're going to do a summit, is we need to talk more.
Exactly.
We need to hear from those of you out there who are hearing this, from you too. Tell us your story. Sign up for that Thrivivors online community. Contact me, contact Jan. There's ways to contact Alan. And yes, we can all join our voices and become stronger
Yeah.
and get this message out.
Yeah. It's really true. It takes a a real conscious effort to start a movement.
It does. And we're in it for the long run.
Yeah.
This is a long run visioned foundation.
Mhm.
We know that this all takes time and it's for the long run.
Right.
It's a generational change that will occur.
And I believe it can happen in a generation.
Absolutely.
I believe it can
If not
happen
quicker,
to a
hopefully.
huge degree. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It'll take time.
Hopefully, I'd like to see some of it before
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
dead.
absolutely. Yeah.
Change.
Which will be
But-
until, what, is 105?
Yeah, 103. That's
103.
my
It's
number.
103,
That's my
exactly.
expiration
103.
number is when I'm
You got a long time.
3.
There you go.
I got to keep my mind so I can keep doing this.
And not to make a play on words, but I think this foundation has a great foundation, and Alan Manwaring is
Yeah.
the person who's really giving us a strong foothold on making these things happen. So, Al, it's
You
big
guys.
Thank you.
I agree. I
You guys.
Thanks for joining us.
This is fun.
Yeah.
This is fun.
was fun. Thank you, Dave, for co-hosting. Thank you, Alan,
Privilege. Thank you. This is a
for
privilege.
being a part of the solution, because it does take, like you said, it takes time, but it takes methodical planning and then methodical implementation.
Absolutely.
And it takes one person at a time.
Yes.
It is one story,
Yeah.
one survivor, one person having a breakthrough, getting a little closer to their healing, and
And-
healing all along.
Absolutely. And Ken Rose will not mind me saying this.
Yeah.
But he, his whole concept when he heard about the foundation and what you were doing,
Yeah, and he's a music
he's
producer
a
in
music producer in Hollywood.
Hollywood. He's
and
amazing.
amazing. Him and his
Person.
wife Liz are just fantastic.
Yeah.
Anyway, his whole thing is if you, Jan, do this and you help one person, it will have been all worth it.
Yeah.
The one.
It is about the one.
It's about the one. I mean, if what we're doing here helps one person not experience the things that we've experienced, it'll be worth it.
Yep. Amen.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
It was a pleasure.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you for sharing this journey with me today. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show. This really helps us spread the word. And if you know someone who would benefit from listening to our show, please do me a favor and share one of our episodes with them. I want every survivor to know that they are not alone and that there is help available. Links to my website, our foundation, the new book, our online community, Thrivivors, and newsletter can be found in the show notes. All of my contact info is there as well. This year, my number one focus is on sharing our stories. This is so important because it's the launching pad to our healing journey, and it inspires the survivor who is still suffering in silence. I don't want anyone to suffer alone anymore. So please reach out. I want to hear from you. Until next time, my friends, this is Mama Jan signing off. Over and out on 2. Bye-bye.